Hey everybody, Billy Obenauer here, continuing our management lessons. These lessons are meant to accompany Bateman and Konopowski's management textbook. In this lesson, we're going to be covering their chapter 12, which focuses on teamwork. So let's go ahead and get started. As we move through this lesson, we're going to talk about how teams can contribute to an organization's effectiveness. We're going to look at the new team environment compared to that of traditional work teams. We're going to talk about how groups can become teams, explain why groups sometimes fail. We're going to look a little bit at how to build an effective team. We're going to talk about methods for managing teams' relationships with other teams, and we're going to give some examples of ways that we can manage conflict. Now, this lesson is going to be highly relevant to you because almost all companies use teams in some way, shape, or form these days. So the likelihood is that you'll be working in and leading teams, and your ability to work in and lead teams is going to be important for you as an employee, and it's going to create value for your employer. Now, teams often serve as the building blocks for our organizational structure. And when they're structured properly so that member skills complement each other, they can lead to increased productivity, improved quality, and reduced costs. They can also help to drive innovation and change while also providing benefits for members of the team. Now, one of the challenges that we have in this space is that we often use the words group and team interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable. They mean different things. And this can be really challenging for students because even your textbooks use them interchangeably sometimes by accident. Okay? A group is basically a collection of people who are working towards the same cause, but they're not going to produce anything more than the sum of their parts. Think about a project where you have three other people and you get the project, you look at the objectives, you break them down into four sections, each of you writes a portion of the paper, somebody slams those four portions into the same document, and you submit it. Okay? That's a group. You're not getting anything extra out of working together like that. Now, if you were a team, what you would do is you would find out what are the specialties of each of the people in your collection, right? Maybe somebody's good at research, maybe somebody's good at writing, maybe somebody else is better at proofing. And then you would find ways that the four of you can work together so that you can use your individual skills to the best of your ability such that you complement each other and that what you produce collectively is greater than the sum of what you each produce individually. That's an example of working as a team. The new work environment is much more conducive to teamwork than work environments were traditionally. So for example, today managers and team members tend to plan together as opposed to managers doing the planning on their own. Job duties are more broad in nature. They require a broader set of skills and knowledge. Information is much more freely shared than it was in the past. We also encourage risk-taking more than we did in the past. When we look at rewards and incentives, they tend to be more based on team performance today than they were in the past. And as far as processes go, everyone contributes to improving work processes today. This is no longer simply a management responsibility. Now we're going to talk about a few of the different types of teams that you might see in the workplace. The first one is the most common. It's the one that you probably think of when you think of a team, and that's a work team. That's basically a collection of people working towards an ongoing goal. So in my career, I worked a lot with sales teams where we'd have people who went out to job sites and to customer offices to sell. We had people who were inside of our store location taking orders. We had other people in support roles. But together, these people were working in ways where their skills complemented each other and they were trying to drive the sales of the organization. That's an example of a work team. Then we have project and development teams. And project and development teams come together for a specific period of time to achieve a task, and then they eventually disband. So maybe we're working on new product development and we bring together a group of experts in an area and we have them work together. They have complementary skills. They develop a new product for us, and then once that product is developed and out to market, the team disbands and everyone is reassigned to new work roles. That's an example of a development team. Okay, and then we have parallel teams. Like their name sounds, their work is done in parallel to their regular job duties. So if you're managing for a company and you wanted a new computer system, you might need some recommendations on what the right system would be for your company. So you assign some individuals from different departments. We've got some people from accounting, from sales, from operations, and they're working together to identify the needs of the organization and identify computer systems that can meet the organization's needs. Now, when they're done, they make a recommendation to management, and management either follows that recommendation or they don't. And then ultimately the team gets disbanded and people no longer have to serve this additional function of being on a parallel team. Management teams are teams of managers who are working together to coordinate the activities of the units they manage so that collectively they're working to meet the organization's goals. Transnational teams have members whose responsibilities reside in multiple different nations, and virtual teams are not in the same physical location, but they're dispersed across different geographic areas and connected through technology. Now, as you might imagine, as we look at these different types of teams here, sometimes teams can fall into multiple categories. So a transnational team can also be a virtual team, or a management team can also be a virtual team. Now, as we go through this next set of definitions, this is a great example of where we start to use the words teams and group interchangeably when maybe we shouldn't. So as we go through these definitions, what I want you to take away here are the core parts of the definitions, not whether or not we're assigning a team or group label. In many cases, whether or not a team or group label is appropriate is going to be specific based upon the work being done by the collective of individuals. So for example, a traditional work group is essentially a group that has no managerial responsibilities. It's a collection of people that reports to a supervisor or a manager who provides direction to them. Now, this may be a group, it may be a team, right? It may be a group of people who have their own individual responsibilities and kind of the sum of the parts equals the whole. Or we could potentially have some teamwork going on in here where people's skills complement each other and they help each other and essentially they produce more than what they would individually. So again, we don't want to focus on the group versus the team dynamic here in terms of how this definition works, but essentially our traditional work group is a collective of people that reports to a supervisor. The next type of team we'll talk about is a quality circle, and this is a voluntary group of people within an organization that essentially comes from a variety of different places, and they work together to make suggestions about quality improvement within the organization. Semi-autonomous work groups make important production and operational decisions, but they do so with support from other operational groups. Autonomous work groups make similar decisions on their own without the support of other groups. And then self-designing teams have basically the same responsibilities as autonomous work groups, but they also make important personnel decisions such as hiring, firing, and work design. Self-managed teams are autonomous in nature, and team members are trained to perform most of the major functions within the team so that collectively between them all they have the ability to manage the team on their own. They essentially have no traditional supervisor. Okay, the holacracy that Zappos adopted back in the early 2010s would be an example of a self-managed team. Now, obviously, most managers would prefer that the groups that they manage function as teams, but this doesn't happen overnight, okay? Managers need to understand what it's going to take for this to happen, and you're going to start with the basic group activities, okay? Now, hopefully, we have people in our groups that have complementary skills because that's definitely going to help the transformation process here. We also need some passage of time. People need to build relationships. They need to understand how they can better work together. And then ultimately, we're going to have to take them through different types of team development activities. Our members aren't going to figure this all out on their own. We're going to have to help them learn how they complement each other's skills and how they can best function as a team. We often see the team development process conceptualized as 4 different stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing. And in forming, we basically bring people together and they start to identify what their roles are and set some ground rules for working together. And everything looks like it's going to be good during forming. And then we go into storming, which is an absolute disaster and a nightmare. And people fight and they jockey for position and they try to attain power and they have conflict. Okay, but we get through storming. We get through it eventually, and we get into norming, where we've kind of started to see how things are going to work and how people are going to fit together. And then finally we get to the performing stage where we're able to maximize on our complementary skills. As we discussed, time plays a very important role in the development of teams. And there are two critical time periods that I want to discuss here with you related to this. The first is the forming stage. Okay, as we discussed, this is the very beginning where you're coming together and figuring out how you're going to work together as a team. Well, the norms that you set here are going to be established and they're going to be long-lasting precedents. So if your team's coming together and you're in that forming stage, well, what's going to happen here is if you become a scribe and you're the person who writes everything down and sends notes after meetings, that's going to be your role for a long period of time. So as you're going through this forming stage, it's important that you set precedents that you're comfortable with. And then the second critical period is about halfway between the formation of the team and your first deadline. And what happens here is that essentially at this halfway point, everybody kicks it into high gear and your productivity increases tremendously. And this is something that we see in a model called the punctuated equilibrium model, which essentially shows that in the early stages of team formation, productivity is very low, and then all of a sudden we get to this point where it's like, oh my gosh, we're halfway there, and then productivity jumps. Because temporary teams don't have the luxury of time that we've been talking about, they may experience some challenges in development. Some of the things that we can do as leaders and as managers to help our temporary teams function well are we can emphasize the team's purpose, make sure people believe in what it is that they're there to do. We also have to focus on building psychological safety, and what we mean by that is making sure that people know it's okay to share your ideas. Okay, you don't need to be embarrassed, you're not going to be criticized. All right, we also need to accept failure. All right, sometimes we need to embrace and celebrate failure. People need to know that we don't expect you to be perfect. If they're not afraid to fail, they're going to be willing to take more risks. And then finally, we have to put conflict to work. And what we mean by that is our team members are going to see things differently. If they didn't have different perspectives, then they probably wouldn't be valuable as different members of the team. We don't need a whole team of people who see things exactly the same way. Okay, but sometimes these different perspectives can lead to conflict. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that it leads to healthy conflict where we're building ideas, not unhealthy conflict where we're tearing each other down. And if we can use conflict to help build ideas, then we're going to increase our likelihood of being successful. As our teams develop, we may see leadership within the teams evolve. Okay, we may start with a more supervisory leadership model, where one person is the leader and they're essentially giving some direction to the team. Then we might move on to participative leadership, where the leader of the team is involving team members in the decisions, but the leader is still kind of driving things. And then ultimately, we hope to get to a point of team leadership, where the leader's role is really more to facilitate communication and support the team, but important decision-making processes are going to be driven by the team on the whole. Now, there are a variety of different reasons that groups can fail in the workplace. Okay, they may have poor communication, they might lack a shared vision, maybe the members don't trust each other, or maybe as managers, we haven't empowered them to be successful by giving them the tools they need. Typically, we tend to consider a team effective if its output meets or exceeds the quality or quantity standards that we've set, if members are achieving their own goals, and if team members would like to work together again. So recently, I was on a temporary faculty team, and at the end of our assignment, one of the members said, I really hope we all get to work together again in a future project. That was a real good signal, a real strong signal that we were an effective team. Here are a few tips that will help you as a manager when you try to build effective teams. First, define membership. Figure out who you want on the team. That's going to include people who work well on teams. People who don't work well on teams probably don't need to be assigned to teamwork. Second, don't focus on harmony. People need to work through conflict in a healthy way. Harmony will come when the team is working together effectively. Finally, remember that longevity is good. All too often, we're tempted to break up teams to kind of change things up and see if we get new ideas. But the reality is that when people work together for a long time, they start to get to understand how to work together effectively. Okay, and sometimes it takes time, as we've discussed, to build an effective team. I was on a research team that was really struggling. We were struggling for about a year. Okay, we ended up scrapping ideas. We would end up back to the beginning all over again. And then finally, we started to figure out what our dynamic looked like and how our skills complemented each other. And now we're a very effective team. I wouldn't want to break that team up. And once we have a good team built, we need to make sure that we're motivating them to perform well. Okay, so we need our teams to have a common purpose. They need to understand what their goal is, and they should have goals that are specific and measurable. Go back to our motivation unit. Look at how we set good goals. We need to do this for our teams. That's not just for individuals, that's for teams as well. Okay, once our teams can work towards a common goal, once they can work towards a measurable goal that they understand what they're trying to achieve, we also need to make sure that they have feedback. Again, going back to our motivation unit, the same principles that apply to our goals there apply to our goals for teams. We do need to be aware that social loafing can occur within teams, and this happens when one or two members realize that they can be carried by the work of others, and they actually start putting forth less effort and less energy than if they were working on their own. And you've probably seen this in some of your school projects where you have one person who kind of disappears through the semester, right? And people are able to disappear and engage in social loafing when they don't have consequences for it. So as a manager, you want to make sure that there's some sort of system in place that's going to help identify social loafing and provide some sort of appropriate reinforcement when this occurs. Now, hopefully what's going to happen in our teams is we're going to have a social facilitation effect. And this is where people are actually going to work harder in their teams because they're motivated by their teams. They identify with their team members, they care about their shared goal, and they're working to help each other be successful. Okay, they kind of view themselves as being accountable to each other, not just to you as a manager. Okay, and one final note here of what you can do to help motivate your teams is you can make sure that their rewards are tied to teamwork, not individual work. Now, it's very important that our team members are skilled, and we want people that have technical or functional expertise. We need problem solving and decision making skills, and even interpersonal skills within our teams. And that brings me to a rule that I call the Justice League rule. And the Justice League rule says that team members should have unique skills and abilities that make them essential to the team. And I use the Justice League here because if we take a look at these 7 members, the one who stands out is Superman. Superman has super strength, he has super speed, he can fly, he shoots fire from his eyes, he shoots ice from his breath. You look at Superman, you're like, wow, why wouldn't we just want 7 Kryptonians like Superman on our team? Well, if we had 7 members who were exactly like Superman, we'd also probably have 7 members that could be defeated by magic or kryptonite. Okay, that might be a little bit problematic. All right, but also as we look around at the members of the Justice League, we notice that while many of their skills overlap, each of them has some unique skills as well. So Martian Manhunter is telepathic and he has the ability to be invisible. Okay, Hawkgirl has the ability to kind of separate herself from a situation so she can make very difficult decisions and be more violent than other members of the Justice League can be when she needs to. Wonder Woman can use her lasso of truth to get the truth out of people. Green Lantern has an entire network of collaborators throughout the galaxy and the universe. The Flash has the ability to move his molecules so fast that he can walk through walls. And Batman, because he's a detective, has amazing problem-solving skills. And when we take the 7 of these individuals together and we put them on the same team, we can see how their skills complement each other so that the Justice League is almost undefeatable. Norms really help to shape how people behave in teams. And this can be positive or it can be negative. Sometimes we have really good norms. Like our norms are that we're going to treat people well, we're going to work hard, we're going to be honest, we're going to show integrity. And these are all the types of things that we'd like to see within our teams. So those are examples of positive norms. Sometimes we have other norms though. We have norms that we may think are good norms that aren't good norms. We might have a norm such as that we are not risk takers, okay, or that we're not creative, right? That we follow processes, and that might stifle creativity within our teams. And then sometimes we have teams where there are just bad norms, right? Norms where people punch out early and leave early on Fridays, or something of that effect. So we want to try to manage what the norms are within our teams so that we can get the most out of our people. And sometimes we have subnorms within our team. So we'll have different norms for people in different roles. So a task specialist will be somebody whose norm is that they have to be focused on processes more often, okay? Because they have job-related skills and abilities that might be stronger than other members within the team. So their norm is that they're focused on the processes that relate to these skills and abilities. And then we might have team maintenance specialists, and these are people who, really work on developing cohesive teams, and their norm might be that they spend more time developing interpersonal relationships. Successful team leaders should excel at a variety of different behaviors. We've got four of them up here on this slide. The first one is relating, and this is focused on caring for people and building trust. Because truthfully, when you care for people, they're going to trust you. As a leader, I remember having an employee who was struggling financially, and I knew about this, and I helped them apply for some grant funds. And because I helped them apply for these funds, they saw that I genuinely cared about them, and our relationship grew quite a bit, and they were able to excel even more at their job moving forward. Then we have the scouting behavior, and this is seeking information and investigating problems. And this comes from really just getting to talk to people and understanding what it is that they're doing in the work that they're doing. So I had one of my units that was struggling at one point in time, and I just spent a lot more time with them. Tried to observe what was taking place, what was happening, asking them questions when I saw things occur. And over time, I was able to help them develop a plan to perform better as a team. Then we have persuading, and this is influencing team members and gaining external support. And a lot of this comes from just talking to people, okay, making them understand what your goals are, where they fit into these goals, and so on and so forth, right? At one point in time, I was under a lot of pressure to hit a specific goal. I talked to my team about it, made them understand where this pressure was coming from, and they actually bought into helping me hit that goal, and we were able to achieve it together successfully. And then finally, we have empowering. And this is essentially putting people in a position where they can succeed. And as a manager, I try to empower my employees because I realized that they couldn't really be successful if I didn't give them the tools they needed to be successful. So many of the things that historically in my organizations had been things where we would not necessarily give authority to employees, I gave my employees authority because I wanted them to make decisions and I wanted them to be able to move forward and drive performance within the team. Now, when a team is cohesive or is high on cohesiveness, it's attractive to its members. Okay, people really want to be a part of this team. And this is really, really important because it has impacts on both satisfaction of the members and performance of the team. I can think back to the most cohesive team that I was on back in Rockaway, New Jersey. We had a nickname for our team. People were making signs and T-shirts with the nickname on it. We did things together. Everybody was connected on their cell phones all the time. We'd hit people up on their days off and just be talking because it was almost like you never wanted work to end. That's how close we were, right? And the desire to be a part of this team was so strong. I can remember being promoted and having to leave the team because I was getting a promotion and feeling almost a little bit sad because I was like, wow, I really still kind of want to be a part of this place. But, what happened there is that everyone who was a member of our team had pretty high satisfaction, and our team performed very well. We were one of the top performing teams in the company. Now, cohesiveness is not always good. If a team has to make difficult decisions, cohesive teams may struggle to challenge each other. Fortunately, in the example that I was giving you before, in the team that I was on, our real goal was output. So that's part of why we were able to be so productive as a team. Now, our performance norms were also high. We were consistently driving ourselves to be better. We wanted to be the best. That was our norm. Now, if we had a cohesive team that didn't care about performance, we might not have seen the same performance benefits from our cohesiveness. Now, we can actually break performance norms and cohesiveness into four different quadrants here to look at what we can expect from teams based upon their cohesiveness and their norms. All right, so I'm going to start over here on the left looking at cohesiveness. And if we have high cohesiveness, we should see our teams achieve their goals. All right, so if their performance norms are high, we should see high goal attainment and high task performance because they've set high goals and they've met high goals. Okay, but if cohesiveness is high and performance norms are low, then we're still going to see high goal attainment, but the task performance is going to be low, at least from the manager's perspective, because the team will have set a low goal. So they set a low goal, but they attained it. So we have high attainment, low performance. Now, if we have low cohesiveness, then we're not going to see the team necessarily achieve its goals. So if we have low cohesiveness and low performance norms, then we're going to have poor goal attainment and poor task performance. If we have low cohesiveness and high performance norms, then what we're probably going to see here is moderate goal attainment and moderate task performance, because essentially what we have here is we have our cohesiveness is kind of in conflict with our performance norms. So we want to perform well, but because we're not cohesive, we're not quite there. Now, as managers, you have the ability to influence the cohesiveness and the performance norms of the teams that you manage. And your textbook offers 7 recommendations for how you can do this. And we're going to walk through each one of these recommendations. Okay, we're actually going to walk through recommendation number 1, even though I don't like it at all. And the reason we're going to walk through it is because I think it's more responsible of me to address this recommendation and talk through why I have a problem with it than to ignore that it exists. Now, recommendation number 1 is to recruit members with similar attitudes, values, and backgrounds. I don't like this recommendation because this line of thinking can lead to discrimination. Okay, and for me, valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion is a top priority within my role in society. Okay, and I can't think of a business outcome that would justify compromising this value. All right, so we're just going to go ahead here and we're going to cross off this recommendation, because what we're doing here is we're recognizing that the recommendation exists, and we're acknowledging that the recommendation is also problematic. All right, this is an outdated recommendation, and it does not consider the impact that this recommendation has on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we cross it off, we're moving on. All right, then number 2, we want to maintain high entrance and socialization standards. And by doing this, we're going to help support high performance norms. Recommendation number 3, we want to keep the team as small as possible. And that's because building cohesiveness just becomes more difficult as you have a larger team. All right, recommendation number 4 is to help the team succeed and publicize its successes. And by doing this, we're going to be showing that we value high performance norms. That's going to contribute to the high performance norms. Recommendation number 5 is to be a participative leader. Your involvement there is going to help contribute to the team's cohesiveness. Recommendation number 6 is to present a challenge from outside the team. And this is going to support both cohesiveness and high performance norms, because that challenge from outside the team, that's going to raise the bar for how your team needs to perform. Okay, so that's going to help contribute to the high performance norms. And then your team is going to come together to try to overcome this challenge, and that's going to contribute to cohesiveness. And then finally, we have tie the rewards to team performance. And again, that's going to support both cohesiveness and high performance norms, okay? Because the goals, hopefully, are going to drive high performance and contribute to high performance norms. And by setting them as team goals, people are going to have to work together. They're going to have to come together to achieve these goals and achieve their rewards. So that's going to help contribute to cohesiveness. An important part of managing successful teams is also managing how you interact with other teams. Your team does not exist in a vacuum, okay? You interact with others all the time, and how you interact with others and how you perform with others is going to influence how successful you are. Now, as your team manages outward, you may assign a gatekeeper who's responsible for monitoring the external environment, bringing information to the team, and helping to inform decision-making processes. You may also engage in a variety of different strategies, such as informing, which is where you make decisions and then inform those outside of the team what your team is doing so they understand how the team is acting, how the team is behaving, and they're kind of prepared to interact in an appropriate manner. All right, you may engage in parading, where you emphasize team building and external visibility at the same time. So you do things that help build your team cohesiveness while making sure that others are seeing what your team is doing. You may also engage in probing, and this is where you're going to focus on external relationships and build relationships with others outside of the team, maybe experiment with some solutions to see how they work before making final decisions. Now, as your team interacts with others outside of your team, there are a variety of different types of relationships that you may see emerge. One is a workflow relationship, and this is where work gets passed on from one unit to the next. So your team may be responsible for some type of production, and the work that your team produces may move on to some type of maybe packaging team who takes on the next phase. Okay, then we have service relationships, and this is where activities get centralized. So if you were on a sales team, your team may have to interact with a credit department who helps to establish credit for your customers. Then we have advisory relationships where the team may seek expert advice or some type of expert guidance, and it may not be something that's binding, but you may actually just call to seek an outside opinion on something. Then we have audit relationships where someone evaluates the performance of your team. And this is kind of like the inverse of a stabilization relationship, because a stabilization relationship is where someone provides clearance or approval for something before your team engages in that process. Okay, and then finally we have liaison relationships, and this is when two teams need to interact, but they don't interact directly, they interact through another individual or through another team. Now, conflict can emerge within teams when one member views another member as doing something that's against their best interest. And I used to see this managing sales teams. If one person had a big sale, then that would kind of deplete our inventory, and other salespeople would be worried that they wouldn't have product to sell, and that could lead to some conflict. So as a manager, what I had to do was I had to be very good at managing my inventory, and I had to instill confidence in my salespeople that one person making a big sale was not going to prevent another person from selling product and earning commission. Okay? Now, we can also have conflict in diverse teams or teams with different personalities, and often this arises because we have a diversity of values. And because people have different values, they might look at problems and challenges from different perspectives. But if we value diversity in the workplace and we value an inclusive and respectful environment, then hopefully what we can do is we can help our employees value these same things. And when our employees value these same things, they're going to learn to understand their coworkers, their team members. They're also going to learn to value being respectful over other things, and hopefully we'll see this conflict start to lessen over time. Now, when conflict does occur within our teams, there are a variety of different strategies that we can employ. Okay, we can be uncooperative, all right? And if we're uncooperative, but we're also not assertive, we're essentially going to avoid the conflict. Okay, and avoiding the conflict can be good because it's not too intense, but what's going to happen here is we're not going to resolve anything. The underlying problems that led to conflict are still going to be present. We won't have dealt with them at all. We can be uncooperative and be assertive, and what happens here is we get into a competing mindset, okay? And here the conflict is going to get a little more intense. We're not necessarily going to reach our best solution, okay? We can be cooperative but unassertive, and here we're going to be accommodating. And what happens when we're accommodating is the conflict becomes less intense, which is good, but we don't necessarily reach our optimal outcome, and often somebody has to give something up here. Similar to accommodating, we can go somewhere in the middle here where we're neither cooperative nor uncooperative, and we're neither assertive nor unassertive, and we're compromising. Okay, so we kind of have a little bit of an exchange. All right, I'll give this up if you give that up. I get this and you'll get that. All right, and that can be good to a degree because nobody loses outright and we kind of lessen the conflict a little bit, but it's still not our optimal strategy. Our optimal strategy is going to be cooperative and also to be assertive. And when we do this, we find ourselves collaborating. And when we collaborate, it's easier for everybody to reach their goals. Sometimes the conflict in our teams can be so bad that we have to have a third party, such as a human resource manager, mediate the conflict. And when they do this, they're going to start by investigating and gathering more information. Then they're going to come to a decision about how to resolve the dispute. Then they're going to move forward and they're going to explain their decision and the logic behind it to everybody involved. And then they're going to follow up to make sure everybody understands what the decision was, what their role is, what they have to do moving forward, and that people follow this decision. And they're going to also follow up on what the results were to see if more mediation is needed in the future or if things can move forward. Now, virtual teams can experience as much or more conflict than physically co-located teams. And this is in part due to the fact that being virtual can make it tough to build cohesiveness. Okay? Now, when these teams experience conflict, some of what we found are that avoidance and compromise can hurt team performance. Accommodation has little to no effect on team performance, but collaboration and competition can actually have a positive effect on team performance. Now, that's it for this lesson on teams. This is Billy Obenauer saying thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you soon.